brilliant Hercule Poirot, the world's most famous Belgian detective, created by Agatha Christie. This case is filled with twists, clever clues, and Poirot's signature little grey cells at work. Make yourself comfortable, and let's unravel this elegant puzzle together. And if you'd like, leave a quick comment and tell me where you're joining from. It's always a pleasure to know where our little detective community is tuning in from. Now let's get started. The sun slanted through the window panes of a small, cheerful dining room at the Three Crows Inn, painting golden stripes across the breakfast table. The clink of silverware and the gentle hum of conversation filled the air. At one end of the table, Hercule Poirot sat upright, his napkin folded with military precision across his lap. Across from him, Captain Hastings was buttering a slice of toast with the careless enthusiasm of a man untroubled by detail. "Hastings, mon ami, your choice of footwear pains me deeply." Poirot's gaze rested disapprovingly on his companion's scuffed brown shoes. "English shoes, how do you say, lack finesse. The Belgian shoemaker, he creates poetry for the foot." Hastings sighed. "Poirot, must everything, even breakfast, become a lecture on the inferiority of English craftsmanship?" Poirot raised a delicate eyebrow. "I merely observe, mon cher. The English shoe, it is a blunt instrument, functional, yes, but devoid of grace, whereas the Belgian shoe—" "Poirot, if you love Belgian shoes so much, why don't you marry a pair?" Hastings muttered into his teacup. Poirot's moustache quivered with amusement. "Ah, Hastings, your humour, like your shoes, is most endearingly clumsy." Before Hastings could muster a riposte, the door to the sitting room burst open, and a young woman stumbled in, breathless and clutching a crumpled letter in her trembling hand. Her cheeks were flushed, and her coat had been hastily thrown over a thin cotton dress. The entire room fell silent as she scanned the guests with wide, anxious eyes, until her gaze landed on Poirot. You are him, Hercule Poirot," she stammered. Poirot rose gracefully, adjusting his cuffs. "It is true, mademoiselle, I am he." She hurried toward him, her voice urgent. "I need your help. Please, you must come at once. It's my uncle, Sir Alfred Penwick. He's dead." "Dead?" Hastings repeated, startled. "But it was meant to be natural. They said his heart gave out," she interrupted, voice trembling. "But I know something's wrong. Someone tampered with his shoes." "Shoes?" Poirot's eyes narrowed with sudden interest. "Mademoiselle, pray sit. Tell me everything. And start, if you please, with these curious shoes." The girl sank into a chair, still clutching her letter. Poirot resumed his seat, hands steepled under his chin, while Hastings hovered, mystified. To tamper with the feet of the dead. This is a curious crime indeed. "Proceed, mademoiselle." The young woman, introducing herself as Miss Evelyn Penwick, twisted the letter between her fingers as she spoke. "My uncle, Sir Alfred, was found dead last night in his study. They said it was his heart. He'd had trouble with it before, but when they laid him out, I noticed something strange." "Strange how, mademoiselle?" Poirot leaned forward. "His shoes. Someone had changed them after death. The shoes he wore during the day were gone, and in their place were an old scuffed pair he hadn't worn in years." Poirot's brows lifted. "Most irregular. And you are certain they were switched?" "Absolutely. I used to polish his shoes as a girl. He was particular about them. These shoes were older, badly cared for, and—" She paused, swallowing hard. Inside one of them was a folded scrap of paper. "A paper, you say?" Poirot's voice was sharp now. "And what was written upon this paper?" "A single word." Valentine Hastings frowned. "Valentine? What on earth could that mean?" Miss Penwick shook her head. "I don't know, but my uncle had never mentioned it, and the fact someone hid it in his shoe, well, I knew it had to mean something." Poirot's fingers tapped lightly on the table. A message from the dead, concealed in the very shoe that bore him through life. Most intriguing. But why the shoes? Hastings asked, baffled. Why not a drawer or a pocket? Poirot gave a small smile. A drawer can be locked, a pocket can be searched, but the humble shoe, Hastings, it is too familiar to arouse suspicion. The cleverest hiding places are often the most ordinary. Evelyn's voice dropped to a whisper. Will you help me, Monsieur Poirot? I know something is terribly wrong. Poirot's smile softened. Mademoiselle, you have stirred the curiosity of Hercule Poirot. And once that occurs, the truth, it cannot remain hidden for long. He stood, adjusting his tie. Come, Hastings, to Penwick Manor. The game, as you say, is afoot. There are moments, rare but unmistakable, when Poirot's entire manner shifts, as though some unseen lever has been pulled inside his brain. This was one of them. He leaned back in his chair, fingertips pressed together, his sharp eyes studying Miss Evelyn Penwick with renewed intensity. A word hidden in a shoe. Most peculiar. And of all the words in the English language, you say it was Valentine. Curious indeed. Hastings, who had been following the conversation with increasing confusion, could no longer contain himself. I don't see what's so remarkable about it, Poirot. It's probably some private joke, something sentimental perhaps. Poirot tutted softly. Sentiment, my dear Hastings, is rarely so conveniently placed. Non, this has the air of a message, a whisper from beyond the grave. He turned back to Evelyn. Mademoiselle, your uncle, he was particular about his shoes, was he not? Oh, yes, she replied. He inspected them every morning, and only trusted them to a particular valet to polish. A man who cherishes his shoes does not allow such irregularities as mismatched pairs or hidden papers within. No, this was deliberate. Someone needed to send a message, and the shoe, how do you say, became the post box. Hastings gave a skeptical cough. But surely, Poirot, this could have a perfectly innocent explanation. Valentine might be the name of a pet, or a horse, or even a shoe brand. Poirot's moustache quivered with disapproval. A brand of shoe called Valentine. Mon ami, you have the imagination of a boiled potato. Evelyn gave a weak smile, but Poirot's gaze remained fixed on the far distance, as though he were seeing something none of us could yet perceive. There is something here, something hidden beneath the surface. This word, it is like a thread hanging from a tapestry. One gentle tug and, poof, the entire picture begins to unravel. He stood abruptly, adjusting his tie with precision. Mademoiselle, I shall accept your request. Hastings, polish your unfortunate shoes. We depart at once for Penwick Manor. The Three Crows Inn stood beside a narrow country lane, its windows fogged with the warmth of a winter fire. Outside, the carriage that would take us to Penwick Manor waited, the horse stamping impatiently against the frost-hardened ground. Poirot stood at the threshold, clutching his walking stick like a scepter, issuing instructions to me as though I were a foot soldier preparing for battle. You will bring my travelling case, the small one, not the large, and ensure my patent leather shoes are placed where I can find them easily upon arrival. They may yet be of service. I sighed. We're going to investigate a suspicious death, Poirot, not attend a fashion parade. Poirot's expression was grave. Ah, mon ami, how little you understand. Shoes. They tell a story. The manner in which they are worn, how they are cared for, what secrets they conceal. Sometimes they speak louder than words. I had heard many of Poirot's eccentric theories over the years, but this shoe obsession was quickly becoming one of the strangest. Still, I knew better than to argue. Experience had taught me that beneath Poirot's flair for the dramatic lay a mind capable of grasping connections others would never dream existed. Miss Evelyn, now calmer, thanked Poirot profusely as we climbed into the carriage. Uncle Alfred would have been so reassured to know you were coming. Poirot gave a little bow. It is for Hercule Poirot a most delicate compliment, to be trusted with the secrets of the dead. As the carriage lurched forward, Hastings leaned toward me. Mark my words, Poirot, he muttered. This whole thing will boil down to some family squabble, or misplaced will. Shoes. Honestly, Poirot merely smiled. Perhaps, Hastings. Or perhaps we are about to step into a far more dangerous story. We arrived at Penwick Manor under a sky the colour of unpolished pewter. The house, a sprawling Georgian affair with ivy creeping along its stone walls, exuded that peculiar atmosphere found only in old English estates, a combination of grandeur and discomfort, as though the house itself disapproved of modern visitors. The front door creaked ominously as it swung open, revealing a narrow, severe-faced woman in a starched uniform. Her hands, red from scrubbing, were folded tightly in front of her apron. "I'm Mrs. Treadwell, the housekeeper," she announced. "You'll be the detective." Her gaze flicked toward Poirot, whose immaculate attire stood out sharply against the house's worn interior. "Indeed, madame. Hercule Poirot, at your service." He bowed slightly. "This is my associate, Captain Hastings." Her expression soured slightly at my introduction, though, whether from suspicion or disapproval of my muddy shoes, I couldn't say. "You're expected," she muttered. "This way." We followed her through a hall lined with faded portraits of Penwick ancestors whose painted eyes seemed to watch our every step. The house felt oddly still, as though it had been holding its breath since Sir Alfred's death. Poirot paused abruptly at the threshold to the study. "Madame, one question if I may. When Sir Alfred was found, was there anything peculiar about his shoes?" Mrs. Treadwell's lips pursed. "His shoes, sir." "Yes, his shoes. Did you observe anything unusual?" She hesitated, fingers twitching against her apron. "Well, now you mention it. They weren't his regular pair. He was particular about his shoes, Sir Alfred was. Always wore his black Oxfords indoors. But last night, well, they were an old pair he hadn't worn in years. I thought it strange, but I said nothing." Poirot's moustache gave the smallest triumphant twitch. "Merci, madame. You have told me much already." Hastings sighed as we followed her inside. I had no idea what Poirot had learned from this nonsensical business about shoes, but experience had taught me that when Poirot's curiosity was piqued, some poor soul's secret was about to come tumbling out. The drawing room held all the trappings of country house elegance: polished side tables, a fading Persian rug, and a portrait of Sir Alfred Penwick, gazing sternly down from above the mantelpiece. Beneath that disapproving stare, the gathered guests perched on various pieces of uncomfortable furniture, like a flock of birds startled from their roost. Lady Penwick, the widow, was seated closest to the fire, her slim fingers restlessly folding and refolding a lace handkerchief. She was younger than I expected. Mid-30s, pale, with the faint air of a woman accustomed to luxury but ill-prepared for tragedy. Poirot stepped forward, bowing slightly. "Madame, my condolences on your loss. I am Hercule Poirot, and I hope to bring you clarity in this most distressing affair." Her smile was fleeting, her eyes darting nervously toward the window. "Thank you, Mr. Poirot. It's all such a shock. Sir Alfred's heart was weak, yes. But this was so sudden." Poirot nodded sympathetically, then turned his attention to a heavily built man near the drinks cabinet. Mr. Lionel Chase, whose flushed complexion and restless fingers spoke of a man far more nervous than grief alone could explain. "You were Sir Alfred's business associate, I believe?" Poirot inquired. Chase's smile was thin. "For nearly 20 years, we had differences of opinion recently. But that's nothing. Business disagreements, that's all." Poirot's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Differences of opinion. A most flexible phrase, monsieur." Next, Poirot's gaze landed on a severe-looking woman in her 40s, seated stiffly with her back ramrod straight. This was Miss Caroline Penwick, Sir Alfred's estranged daughter. "You were not living here at the time of your father's death, I believe?" Poirot asked. "No," she said curtly. "I returned when I heard he'd changed his will. I had every right to know whether he intended to restore me to my proper position." "Indeed. And did you have the opportunity to discuss this with him before his untimely passing?" No. Her hands clenched into fists. But someone had better find out what really happened. Poirot's smile was faint. That, mademoiselle, is precisely what I intend to do. In the corner, almost overlooked, stood a stooped, bespectacled man clutching a medical bag. Dr. Bernard Greaves, the family physician. Poirot approached him last. "You were Sir Alfred's doctor?" Poirot asked gently. "For years," Dr. Greaves replied. "He had a weak heart, as you know. It's not unusual at his age. And yet, you appear uneasy, doctor, as though there is something you cannot quite explain." The doctor's eyes darted toward Lady Penwick before he murmured, "Perhaps, but I would rather not speculate." "Speculation, doctor, is the seed from which deduction grows." Poirot gave a small bow before turning back to the room at large. Finally, standing stiffly by the window, was Major Digsby, a retired military man with a chest full of medals and a face like old boot leather. He said nothing, but his sharp eyes missed nothing either. "And you, monsieur, are you a friend of the family?" "Served with Sir Alfred in the war," Digsby barked. "Damn fine officer." Poirot's gaze dropped to the medal pinned crookedly to Digsby's chest. "I see you value the honours of service. Most commendable." He stood back, surveying the room with quiet satisfaction. "Each of you has your secrets. And it is Hercule Poirot's experience that in a house of secrets, the truth is often the rudest guest of all." Lady Penwick gave a small shudder as Poirot's gaze swept over them one last time. You think someone here?" Poirot spread his hands. "I think, madame, that until the truth is revealed, suspicion shall settle over this house like an unwelcome fog." Hastings leaned closer to me, muttering, "He always talks like that when he's in fine form." I nodded grimly. I had seen this performance before. Poirot was circling his suspects, and he never circled without reason. It is a curious thing, watching Poirot work. To the untrained eye, one might believe he was doing nothing at all, merely sitting in a corner, his fingertips pressed together, his small, immaculate shoes planted firmly side by side. But I knew better. At Penwick Manor, his silence spoke volumes. Lady Penwick sat nearest the fire, her fingers endlessly folding and refolding her handkerchief, though the room was already warm. Every so often, she glanced toward the window, as though expecting some unseen menace to appear out of the mist. Poirot cleared his throat gently. "Madame, it must be most distressing, this sudden loss. Yet you are, how shall I say, a woman not easily shaken." Her head snapped up. What do you mean? Grief wears many faces, does it not? Some women cry, some rage, and others fold the handkerchief again and again, as though to stitch the fabric of the past back together. Lady Penwick's hands stilled. "That's ridiculous." "Ah, then it is well. Ridicule, madame, is very comforting to those with nothing to hide." She gave a brittle smile, but said nothing. Poirot let the silence sit a moment longer before shifting his attention to Lionel Chase, who was doing his best to appear nonchalant beside the drinks cabinet. His fingers, however, betrayed him, tapping in irregular rhythm against the glass. "Monsieur Chase, you and Sir Alfred were business partners, yes?" "Correct." "And recently, there was disagreement." Chase's smile flickered like a faulty bulb. "All partnerships have the odd quarrel. But not all end with death, no?" Chase's glass clinked sharply against the cabinet. "Are you accusing me?" "Not at all. I observe. It is my little hobby." Hastings, beside me, muttered, "Poirot, you'll have the whole house in hysterics before you're done." Poirot ignored me, turning next to Miss Caroline Penwick, perched stiffly near the piano. Everything about her posture bristled with contained anger. "Mademoiselle, it must have been a shock to learn your father intended to alter his will." Her jaw tightened. He had no right to cast me aside. And yet he did. Curious, no? The ties of family, they fray so easily. She met his gaze head on. "You're trying to suggest I had something to do with this, aren't you?" I suggest nothing. I merely admire the threads of human nature. They are stronger than silk, yet more fragile than cobwebs. As Caroline glared at him, Poirot smiled gently, as though this were all some agreeable parlour game. But I knew better. The great machine of his mind was already turning, sifting every gesture, every hesitation, into that quietly growing puzzle only he could see. The last two characters in this peculiar play could not have been more different. Dr. Greaves, the thin and nervous family physician, and Major Digsby, whose military bearing could have been cut from granite. Poirot approached Dr. Greaves first, his manner unusually soft. "Doctor, you cared for Sir Alfred's health for many years. This must be a difficult time." Greaves dabbed at his forehead with a shaking handkerchief. "Of course, terrible shock. Terrible. You speak as though rehearsed. You have said these words many times already, I think." The doctor blinked. "Well, yes. The police, Lady Penwick, the coroner. It's all been rather exhausting. And yet, when you speak of Sir Alfred's death, you do not sound surprised. That is most interesting." Greaves paled. "What are you implying?" "Implying, doctor? No, I imply nothing. But sometimes, you see, the truth taps very gently at the window. One need only listen." He turned abruptly to Major Digsby, who stood like a man on permanent parade. "You served with Sir Alfred during the war. Good officer. Damn good. Saved my life once. And now, you find yourself a guest in his house, on the very night he dies. Life has a sense of irony, does it not?" Digsby's jaw tightened. "If you're suggesting—" "I suggest nothing. I wonder only at your fascination with Sir Alfred's medals. One notices such things." For the first time, Digsby's composure faltered. "They're valuable. Historical record, you know." "Indeed. And history. It clings to objects most curiously, especially shoes, n'est-ce pas?" Digsby's brow furrowed. "Shoes? Ah, never mind. It is a passing thought." Poirot turned back to the room, his small figure seeming somehow larger than the sum of its parts. I caught his eye. What on earth do shoes have to do with anything? Poirot's smile was maddeningly serene. "Everything, mon ami. Absolutely everything." The shoes stood side by side upon the polished desk in Sir Alfred's study. One was a sleek black Oxford, polished to a military sheen, the sort of shoe that spoke of habit and pride. The other, its pairing twin, was gone, replaced by a scuffed, creased relic with a cracked sole and a faded buckle. Poirot regarded them as though they were witnesses, rather than objects. "Observe, mon ami. Here lies the beginning of the story. One foot marches forward into the present. The other, it drags behind into the past." I scratched my head. "They're just shoes, Poirot. No one murders a man over footwear." "No one, Hastings? But what if the shoes were not the object of the crime, but its message? A man's shoes, do you not see? They are his silent confession. They tell where he has walked, where he has paused, and, most importantly, what secret he has carried." Bending delicately, Poirot produced a pair of silver tweezers from his pocket and slid them inside the scuffed shoe. Carefully, he withdrew a small folded slip of paper from beneath the insole. Even before he opened it, I saw the word. Faint, trembling, but unmistakable. Valentine. "Again with this Valentine," I muttered. "But what does it mean?" Poirot unfolded the paper fully, studying it with interest. A name, a signature, or perhaps a ghost. The past has left its calling card in the present. Hastings and Hercule Poirot will respond. He laid the paper aside and turned his attention to the scuffed shoe itself, holding it aloft between two fingers. "This shoe, mon ami, was placed here after death. It was not on Sir Alfred's feet when he lived. That is most certain. But why exchange one shoe for another? And why this particular shoe?" "Perhaps a mistake," I offered. "Whoever did it grabbed the wrong pair." Poirot gave me a pitying look. "A mistake? Non. A message. But to whom was it addressed? To Lady Penwick? To the doctor? To the daughter estranged? Or perhaps to me? He placed the shoes back in their unnatural pairing, tapping his chin thoughtfully. A man's last steps, Hastings. They are rarely without meaning. The study was a gloomy room, lined with bookshelves and panelled in dark wood, its air still thick with the scent of pipe smoke and old paper. A fire had burned low in the grate, and a small clock ticked faintly from the mantel. Poirot moved with exaggerated care, his patent leather shoes tapping softly on the carpet. He bent to inspect the floor beneath the window, where a faint streak of mud marked the otherwise spotless rug. "Someone came in through here," I whispered. "A forced entry, perhaps." Poirot shook his head. "Not forced, mon ami, merely forgotten. Notice, the catch on the window, it is unlatched, but the lock shows no sign of damage. This was no burglar fumbling with tools. This was someone at ease, someone at home." He stooped lower, brushing his fingertips across a series of faint scuff marks on the polished floorboards near the desk. "These are the marks of a heavy shoe, not Sir Alfred's own. They belong to someone accustomed to marching, perhaps." "Major Digsby," I ventured. Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Perhaps. Or perhaps the marks belong to someone wishing us to think so. The truth, Hastings, it wears many disguises." The next morning, the household was in uproar. Mrs. Treadwell, the housekeeper, had discovered something both absurd and alarming. "Someone's stolen Major Digsby's shoes," she declared, wringing her hands, "and left these in their place." She held up a pair of nearly identical shoes, but they were older, the leather cracked, the laces frayed. Major Digsby himself stood apoplectic, one foot bare, the other thrust angrily into a mismatched boot. "Who the devil would take my shoes?" he bellowed. "Confounded nonsense." Poirot examined the replacement pair with interest. Curious. One shoe exchanged after death, and now a second pair disappears. Someone, Hastings, is composing a most curious symphony, and the instrument, they have chosen the humble shoe. As we returned to our room to dress for breakfast, Hastings shook his head. "This shoe business is madness, Poirot. Absolute madness. Who steals a shoe and leaves another in its place? What does it all mean?" Poirot stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back. "It means, mon ami, that someone in this house is telling us a story, but they do not wish to be understood too quickly. They create confusion to hide the truth, but in doing so, they leave a trail." "What kind of trail?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "The trail of the footsteps, Hastings. The shoes. They do not lie. They are not sentimental. They are practical, and yet they remember every step taken by their wearer. This is not a crime of passion alone. It is a crime of memory, a crime that began many years ago. And you know who did it? I know who knows the truth, and soon, mon ami, so shall we." If there was one thing I had come to understand about Poirot, it was his belief that the human soul was far more revealing than any fingerprint or footprint. He cared little for forensics, which baffled me to no end. But give him a drawing room full of secrets, and Poirot was in his element. The household was summoned, one by one, to endure what I privately called the Poirot Inquisition. There were no shouted accusations, no dramatic finger-pointing, just Poirot's calm, almost surgical dissection of their hearts, motives, and fears. Lady Penwick arrived first, her usual composure barely intact. She perched on the edge of the settee, her fingers worrying at the hem of her sleeve. "Madame, your husband was particular about his shoes, non?" Poirot began, his tone almost conversational. "Shoes? Yes, of course. Alfred was fussy about such things." "Fussy, indeed. A man's shoes, you see, they are his signature. The crease of the leather, the polish, the wear upon the sole. They tell the story of his life, and perhaps, madame, they also tell the story of his death." She blanched. "What are you implying, Mr. Poirot?" "I imply nothing. I observe. It is my little hobby." Next came Miss Caroline, stiff-backed and defensive, her chin tilted upward in defiance. "Mademoiselle, you have returned after many years estranged. Tell me, when you were a child, did you ever polish your father's shoes? Her eyes narrowed. Why does that matter? Because a man who trusts no one will always trust his shoes. And yet, after his death, his shoes were changed. Who would know their importance? A stranger or someone from long ago? She said nothing, her jaw tight, her hands knotted in her lap. Each guest passed through the same quiet ordeal. Lionel Chase, sweating under Poirot's steady gaze. Dr. Greaves, blinking too rapidly, his fingers twitching. And finally, Major Digsby, whose military stiffness faltered just once, when Poirot asked if Sir Alfred had ever walked in borrowed shoes during the war. Borrowed shoes, Digsby barked. What sort of nonsense is this? Nonsense? Or perhaps an old habit, born of necessity, remembered now in death. And just like that, the stage was set for a most peculiar tale. After the final interview concluded, I found Poirot seated at Sir Alfred's desk, one shoe in each hand, turning them over with a tenderness I found almost comical. Poirot, you've questioned everyone, and still all you care about are those blasted shoes. He gave me a look of serene patience. Hastings, mon ami, you see, but you do not observe. These shoes, they are the heart of the matter, and what lies within the heart is far more revealing than you imagine. With a flick of his deft fingers, Poirot slid the lining back from the old scuffed shoe. From inside, he withdrew a small, folded envelope, yellowed with age and smelling faintly of leather and polish. Good heavens! More papers in the shoes? But of course, Sir Alfred, he was a man who trusted only his own feet, and so he made his shoes the guardians of his secrets. The letter, written in faded ink, bore only 2 words on its exterior. For Valentine. Poirot opened it with care, eyes scanning the delicate script. His expression grew increasingly intrigued. Mon Dieu, what a story this shoe could tell. He passed me the letter, and I read, My dearest Valentine, you will not forgive me, I know this. But war makes liars of us all. If they discover what I have done, they will hang me, or worse. I have hidden the truth where no one will look. Not in my pocket, not in my desk, but at my feet, where my soul truly rests. One day, if the truth must be known, the shoes will speak for me. Alfred. I looked up in amazement. Valentine? Was it a woman? Poirot's eyes twinkled. Perhaps. Or perhaps it was something else entirely. A name can conceal a person. Or an idea. We shall see. He retrieved the matching polished shoe, performing the same maneuver with the lining. This time, he produced a second, smaller scrap of paper, almost overlooked. It bore only a sequence of numbers. Coordinates, I ventured. Not coordinates, dates, specific days, each one connected to a particular wartime operation. But why hide these in his shoes? Poirot's expression grew thoughtful. Because, Hastings, a man's shoes go where he goes. They do not remain behind like a locked drawer or a hidden safe. They are the most loyal of guardians, and Sir Alfred, he had much to hide. I sat down heavily. So this isn't just a family quarrel over a will. No, mon ami. This is a story of war, betrayal, and a debt that was never paid. Valentine, it is not a lover, it is a code name. And someone, even now, is walking in those same footsteps, trying to bury the past once again. I felt a familiar shiver run down my spine, the shiver that always came when Poirot's mind was racing ahead into darkness, leaving me to stumble after him, blind and bewildered. There are few moments in life when one feels the ground shift beneath one's feet. Not literally, of course, but in the sense that a curtain has been drawn back to reveal something entirely unexpected. This, I suspected, was one such moment. Poirot, still holding the faded letter marked for Valentine, stood before Lady Penwick in the dimly lit drawing room. The household had dispersed after the interviews, but Poirot had quietly requested a word with the widow alone. Madame, you knew, did you not, that your husband had a secret from the days of the war? His voice was gentle, but his eyes missed nothing. Lady Penwick stiffened. A secret? What do you mean? A name, madame. Valentine. He held up the letter, its edges curling with age. For a fraction of a second her composure cracked. A small gasp escaped her lips before she recovered, hands clasped tightly in her lap. I don't know the name. Non, madame. This is not the truth. And the truth, you see, it matters to Poirot. The truth, it always leaves footprints, like the shoes themselves. There was a silence so heavy that even the crackling of the fire seemed muted. Then she spoke, her voice low and trembling. Valentine was a woman, a nurse he met during the war. A nurse, or something more. Poirot's gaze sharpened. A lover, perhaps. A secret lover, hidden away in the fog of war. She nodded, her fingers twisting her handkerchief into a knot of lace and nerves. He never spoke of her, not to me. But once, early in our marriage, I found a letter addressed to Valentine, tucked inside a book. I confronted him, of course. He swore it was nothing. An old flirtation, long forgotten. And you believed him? Poirot's voice was soft, almost pitying. She lifted her chin. I had no choice. Yet the name haunted him still. Even at the end, he left the message hidden in his shoe. It was not forgotten, madame. Not for one moment. Her composure faltered once more. What does it mean? What does Valentine have to do with his death? That, madame, remains to be seen. But know this. The past leaves footprints, and these footprints, they lead directly into the present. As Poirot folded the letter back into its ancient creases, I could not help but wonder, who was Valentine? And why, after all these years, did she matter enough to be the last word a dying man concealed in his shoe? The house had finally settled into uneasy quiet that evening, when a terrified scream shattered the stillness. It came from somewhere near the servants' corridor, and I was halfway up the stairs before Poirot's voice rang out behind me. Hastings, vite, quickly! We arrived at the source of the noise, a narrow cupboard beneath the staircase, used for storing cleaning supplies and, rather oddly, shoes. Mrs. Treadwell, the housekeeper, stood frozen, her face as white as a sheet, pointing one trembling hand at the cupboard door. Poirot eased past her and opened the door. Inside, Major Digsby lay slumped against the shelves, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. His face was tinged an unhealthy shade of grey, and in his right hand, clenched tightly even in death, was a polished shoe, stained with blood. Hastings took an involuntary step back. Good heavens! Poirot bent beside the body, his expression sombre, but almost unsurprised. You see, Hastings, the trail of the shoes. It leads to death once more. But how did he... Why here? What on earth was he doing in the shoe cupboard? Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he delicately pried the shoe from the Major's stiffening fingers. It is the pair, mon ami. The match to Sir Alfred's scuffed shoe, the one found on his feet after death. I was stunned. But what does that mean? Poirot's gaze flicked to the shelves, noting the meticulous rows of polished footwear. It means, Hastings, that someone has been playing a very careful game. The shoes, they are no longer mere footwear. They are the pieces in a puzzle of deception, revenge, and death. Mrs. Treadwell clutched the doorframe for support. I only came to put away the silver polish. I didn't expect to find... She broke off, sobbing into her apron. Poirot laid a hand gently on her arm. Courage, madame. You have found only what was always here, a secret long hidden, but one that could not stay buried forever. Hastings cleared his throat. But Poirot, if Major Digsby is dead, does that mean he was the one responsible for Sir Alfred's death? Poirot shook his head, the smallest smile tugging at his lips. Non, mon ami. Do not fall into the trap so easily. You see, there is more than one shoe in this story, and more than one player. He stood, brushing invisible dust from his lapel. Come, Hastings. There is much work to do before the truth can walk into the light. I followed him out into the hall, heart pounding, as somewhere in the house a clock struck midnight, its chimes falling over Penwick Manor like the toll of a distant bell. Whatever truth lay ahead, it was clear. It would not be comfortable to walk in. We returned to Poirot's temporary command post, a small study near the library, where he perched on a straight-backed chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. The household was, once again, left to its own devices, though I doubted anyone was sleeping soundly after the discovery of Major Digsby's body. I stood by the fire, trying to gather my thoughts. It's obvious, isn't it, Poirot? Digsby knew something, perhaps about Sir Alfred's past, and someone silenced him. Poirot tilted his head. You leap too quickly, Hastings. When you see a man dead, you say murder. When you see a man running, you say guilt. But the true criminal, he does not run. He waits, he watches, and sometimes he weeps. I groaned. You're not going to make this easy, are you? Non, mon ami. The truth, she is rarely easy. Poirot stood and began pacing. Consider the suspects. First, Lady Penwick, a widow, beautiful and nervous. She would seem the obvious choice, no? A quarrel, a broken heart, and perhaps a hidden lover. C'est dramatique, but you don't believe that. Poirot gave a small smile. Lady Penwick hides something, but I do not think it is murder. No, her secret is of a more personal nature. The ghost of Valentine still haunts her, mais oui, but she is no killer. And Lionel Chase? I asked. Ah, Chase! He has the air of a man cornered financially. But desperate men, they steal, they lie, they do not murder so elegantly. That left Miss Caroline, Sir Alfred's estranged daughter. She had returned to the house uninvited and lingered in every doorway with a watchful eye. She has motive, I said. If Sir Alfred was about to change his will, that's reason enough. Poirot paused. And yet, her anger is too bold, too loud. A guilty person. Ah, they speak softly, mon ami. They walk in quiet shoes. So, who does that leave? Poirot's eyes gleamed. It leaves the one who plays the quietest note in the orchestra. A note so soft, one almost forgets it is there. And yet, it holds the whole melody together. I stared at him, baffled as ever. Meaning what? Poirot only smiled. Patience, Hastings. The curtain has not yet risen on the final act. The next morning, Dr. Greaves was summoned for what Poirot referred to, with some relish, as a most delicate conversation. The doctor arrived looking even paler than usual, clutching his medical bag like a lifeline. Poirot seated him by the window, where the light fell directly onto his anxious face. Doctor, you knew Sir Alfred's health intimately, n'est-ce pas? Poirot began. Of course, Greaves said quickly. His heart, it was weak for years. And yet, you found his sudden death surprising. Greaves shifted in his seat. Well, yes. I mean, we expected some decline, but it was rather abrupt. Abrupt? Or perhaps encouraged. Poirot's voice was soft, but the impact was sharp. Greaves blinked. I beg your pardon? Poirot leaned forward slightly. A man with a weak heart. He requires care, precaution. One small push and the heart, poof, it stops. Tell me, doctor, were there any signs that Sir Alfred's death was assisted? The doctor went red. Poirot, I'm no fool. The thought crossed my mind, but there was no clear evidence. Ah, but what evidence does the heart leave when it is frightened to death? None that the stethoscope can detect. But the mind, the guilty mind, it leaves its shadow. Greaves clutched the arms of his chair. I only know what I saw. His shoes were wrong. His expression was strange. He looked almost relieved. Relieved. Curious. The man who fears for his life does not greet death with relief. Unless, of course, he believes the death will bring peace to some old secret. Greaves shook his head. I don't understand. Poirot stood, tapping his finger against the window pane. You do not need to understand, doctor. Not yet. But tell me one last thing. Did Sir Alfred ever mention the name Valentine to you? The doctor's brow creased. Valentine? No, I don't think so. Not even during the war years? In moments of fever or delirium? Greaves hesitated, just a heartbeat too long. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Ah, I see. Even silence can tell a story, no? Merci, doctor. You have been most helpful. As the doctor left the room, I turned to Poirot. You don't believe him? Poirot's smile was faint. When a man remembers nothing, Hastings, it is often because he remembers too much. I am not, by nature, an impatient man. I have served in war, endured the drudgery of civilian life, and spent years in the company of Hercule Poirot, whose devotion to detail would test the patience of a saint. And yet, even I had my limits. We were back in our guest quarters after interviewing Dr. Greaves, and Poirot was, for the third time, arranging Sir Alfred's mismatched shoes on the small writing desk. I could no longer contain myself. Poirot, I said sharply, this is ridiculous. He raised a single immaculate eyebrow. Ridiculous, mon ami? Yes. Shoes, always shoes. A man is dead, 2 men in fact, and you're fussing over scuffed soles and missing laces. People kill for money, for love, for revenge, but not for shoes. Poirot gave a delicate shrug. Then I shall count myself fortunate. It seems I have stumbled upon the first such case in history. I threw my hands in the air. You're impossible, and besides, Major Digsby's death changes everything. He must have found something important. It can't be about a pair of shoes. Poirot's smile was maddeningly serene. Ah, Hastings. Your mind, it is like an English garden, charming but orderly. You wish all crimes to be neat. But life, mon ami, life is untidy, and so is murder. Well, I'm glad you're enjoying yourself, I muttered. Poirot stood, adjusting his cuffs. Enjoyment, no, but intrigue, oui. This crime, it is not madness, it is choreography, each step planned, each footprint left deliberately. But for whom? That, Hastings, is the question. I sighed, resigned. After all, Poirot was always right in the end. I only wished he would get there a little faster. Poirot stood at the window, gazing out over the frost-bitten lawn of Penwick Manor. I had seen that expression before, a half-smile, half-frown, as though he were listening to some invisible orchestra, the music audible only to him. What are you smiling at? I asked warily. At you, mon ami, and at the truth, which hides so very close. I suppose you think you've solved it. Solved? No, not yet. But the story, the story is becoming clear. You see, Hastings, it was never about the shoes. I stared at him. It wasn't? No, mon ami, it is about the footprints they left behind. He turned away from the window, hands clasped behind his back, moustache quivering with satisfaction. It is not the leather, the polish, or even the paper hidden within. It is the steps taken, steps from the past into the present. The shoes, they do not speak of fashion, Hastings. They whisper of fear, of love betrayed, of secrets buried beneath years of silence. I shivered, though the room was warm. Poirot smiled again, that infuriating, knowing smile, and I realized, with sinking certainty, that the truth was very near indeed. The grand drawing-room at Penwick Manor had been cleared of its usual clutter of porcelain dogs and embroidered cushions. Chairs had been drawn into a wide semicircle, creating what Poirot called, with some satisfaction, his theatre of truth. At precisely 8 o'clock, the household gathered. Lady Penwick sat nearest the fire, looking pale but composed. Miss Caroline stood near the window, arms folded like a soldier braced for bad news. Lionel Chase hovered near the drinks cabinet, fingers twitching toward the brandy decanter. Dr. Greaves slumped in a chair near the door, looking as though he would very much like to bolt. Poirot stood before them, hands clasped delicately, his head tilted slightly to one side, as though considering a particularly troublesome piece of embroidery. Mesdames et messieurs, You are no doubt wondering why I have gathered you here tonight. It is simple. The time has come to lift the curtain and reveal the truth that has walked among us in the shape of a pair of shoes. Hastings gave a small groan beside me. Poirot ignored him. In every crime, there are facts, and there is the story behind the facts. Tonight, Hercule Poirot shall tell you that story, and by its end, the murderer shall have no place to hide. The tension in the room tightened like a violin string. Even the fire seemed to burn more quietly, as though holding its breath. Poirot's gaze swept the assembled faces, lingering on each one in turn. Lady Penwick, Miss Caroline, Mr. Chase, Dr. Greaves, each of you had a reason to fear Sir Alfred's secrets. Each of you could have tampered with the shoes, left the message, committed the crime. And yet, only one of you did. There was a collective inhale, like a house preparing to sneeze. Poirot smiled, that maddening, confident smile that meant the truth was already in his grasp. Let us begin, mes amis, with Lady Penwick. For her story, it is perhaps the most personal of all. Lady Penwick straightened at the sound of her name, her hands twisting in her lap. Poirot regarded her with something that, to my surprise, resembled gentle sympathy. Madame, you were seen, were you not, leaving Sir Alfred's study shortly before his death? A small detail, easily overlooked. Except for one thing, you were carrying a pair of gloves. Lady Penwick's eyes widened. Gloves? I don't remember. But you do, madame. And these were not ordinary gloves. They bore the unmistakable stain of shoe polish. Black polish, the very shade used to tend Sir Alfred's beloved Oxfords. She shook her head. That's ridiculous. Why would I? Why indeed? Unless you were tampering with the shoes. Not to plant a message, but to remove one. Hastings frowned beside me. But the message was still there. In the shoe. Poirot nodded. Exactement. But the message you sought to remove, it was a different one. One addressed not to Valentine, but to you. Lady Penwick gasped. I don't know what you mean. Poirot raised a finger. But you do, madame. Long ago, before you became Lady Penwick, there was a letter your husband wrote to Valentine, the lover he betrayed. And you, madame, you were that lover. There was a stunned silence. What? I exclaimed. Ah, Hastings, you see, but you do not observe. Valentine was not some mysterious wartime nurse. It was a code, a name they used when writing to one another, in secret. Madame Penwick was once that Valentine, but after the war, Sir Alfred chose respectability over romance. He married her under her true name, burying Valentine forever. Or so he thought. Lady Penwick's hands trembled. I burned those letters years ago. Poirot gave a small shrug. Perhaps you thought so, but Sir Alfred, he was not a man to throw away secrets so easily. He kept one letter, tucked inside his shoe, a reminder of the woman he loved and betrayed. Her voice broke. That's why I went into the study. I saw him open the shoe, the old shoe he hadn't worn in years. I knew the letter must be inside. And so you tried to retrieve it, to destroy it. But you were too late. Sir Alfred was already dead. The letter was gone, but the name remained. Valentine. A message to the one woman who would understand it. You. Tears welled in her eyes. But I didn't kill him. I swear it. Poirot inclined his head. Of that, madame, I am certain. You tampered with the shoes out of fear, but fear, it is not the same as guilt. The true murderer. Ah, that is another matter entirely. He turned away, leaving Lady Penwick trembling in silence. I stared at him in disbelief. But if it wasn't her, I whispered. Who was it? Poirot's smile returned. Patience, mon ami. The dance is not yet over. Poirot stood perfectly still in the centre of the drawing room, hands clasped neatly before him. His gaze, however, was locked firmly upon Lionel Chase, who had retreated to the sideboard and poured himself a particularly large glass of brandy. Monsieur Chase, you assured me, did you not, that at the time of Sir Alfred's death you were nowhere near the study? Chase gave a nervous chuckle. That's correct. I was in my room all evening. Hadn't spoken to Alfred since dinner. A pity that, because you see, monsieur, the servants, they have eyes, and those eyes, they saw something rather inconvenient to your story. Chase froze. What do you mean? Poirot took a step forward, one delicate finger raised. The gardener, who had stepped out for a quiet cigarette by the greenhouse, saw a most curious thing. He saw you, Monsieur Chase, entering the study, through the garden door, at precisely 10:15. The glass in Chase's hand trembled. That's nonsense. The gardener is a man of little imagination, monsieur, and his eyesight, it is most excellent. You see, he noticed not only your figure, but also your distinctive habit of carrying your handkerchief folded in a particular way, stuffed into your sleeve, military style. Such habits, they betray us, n'est-ce pas? Chase's mouth opened, then closed. I only went in to speak with Alfred, to smooth things over. Indeed. Then why did you lie about it? Well, it looked bad, sneaking in like that. I didn't want to make trouble for myself. Poirot's brow lifted. Monsieur, the truth, she is inconvenient, yes, but always preferable to a lie. Yet you lied, and that, you see, interests Hercule Poirot very much. Chase drained his glass, his hands shaking. All right, I admit it. I went to beg Alfred for more time. I was on the verge of ruin, and he'd threatened to expose me to the board. And so you begged, and you pleaded. But what happened next, monsieur? Did you argue? Did you, in a moment of desperation, strike him? No! Chase's voice cracked. I left him alive, I swear it. And yet, after you left, Sir Alfred's shoes were changed. The paper was tucked inside. The message Valentine was left for us to find. Someone entered the study after you, monsieur, but you were there first. You told a lie to cover your tracks, and lies, Monsieur Chase. They are shoes too. They leave prints wherever you walk. Chase slumped into a chair, a broken man. But Poirot was not yet finished. His gaze turned next to Miss Caroline, whose defiant pose had not softened since the evening began. And now, mademoiselle, we come to you. Miss Caroline Penwick met Poirot's gaze with cold defiance. Of all the household, she alone seemed almost eager to be questioned, as though daring Poirot to try his tricks upon her. Mademoiselle, your return to Penwick Manor, it was unannounced, unexpected, and most suspicious. Tell me, why did you come back? I had my reasons, she said stiffly. Family reasons. A charming phrase. But the truth, it is less charming, is it not? You came back not for family, but for a letter, a particular letter your father possessed, a letter that would have changed everything. She flinched, but said nothing. This letter, it concerned you directly. It was a private document, was it not? One that proved Sir Alfred had decided, at long last, to restore your position in his will. There was a collective gasp around the room. That's a lie, she said quickly. There was no such letter. Ah, but there was. Your father, he may have been harsh, but in his heart, he could not leave his daughter cut off forever. But the letter, it disappeared. Why? Because you never found it, did you? And so you searched. You crept into the study. Perhaps you even saw Monsieur Chase leave. You searched the desk, the drawers, the cabinets, and then you remembered. Remembered what? She snapped. The shoes, mademoiselle, your father's peculiar habit, known only to those closest to him. He hid important documents in his shoes, a habit from his days in espionage during the war. But by the time you looked, the paper you sought had already been replaced by another, a message to Valentine. Her breath caught. I knew nothing about that. Non? And yet, you searched. You knew your father's secrets better than anyone, because you once lived in this house. You knew where to look. You did not kill him, mademoiselle. But you were there, rifling through his belongings while his body was scarcely cold. That's absurd, she cried. "I was only trying to understand why he'd summoned me." Poirot spread his hands. "So you say. And yet, the truth, it fits as snugly as a well-made shoe." Miss Caroline's defiance faltered. I could see it in the slump of her shoulders, the way her hands trembled ever so slightly. "You did not kill your father, but your presence, mademoiselle, your desperate search, it set in motion a chain of events that led us all here. You, too, walked in the footprints of the past." Poirot turned away, leaving her shaken and silent. But I knew the final revelation was still to come. The room was hushed, every breath held in anticipation, as Poirot turned to the last person seated, Dr. Bernard Greaves, who had spent most of the evening shrinking into his chair, fingers nervously twitching against the handle of his medical bag. Poirot's tone softened, almost tender. "Doctor, the time has come. The curtain rises on the final act, and you, mon cher docteur, you stand alone upon the stage." Greaves's head shot up, eyes darting wildly from face to face. "This is absurd. What possible reason could I have had to harm Sir Alfred?" Poirot gave a small sigh, almost regretful. "Ah, you ask the wrong question. The question is not why you harmed Sir Alfred, but why you once loved him." There was a collective gasp. I nearly choked on my own astonishment. Loved him? Poirot's fingers fluttered through the air, as though conducting an invisible orchestra. "Oui, Hastings. For you see, Valentine, this mysterious figure whose name appeared in the shoe, was not a woman at all. It was a man. And that man sits before us now. Dr. Greaves, or as Sir Alfred knew him during the war, Valentine." The doctor's face drained of all colour, his hands trembling so violently that his medical bag slipped from his grasp and thudded onto the carpet. "Ridiculous," he croaked. "Valentine was just a code name, an operational alias during the war." "Precisely, an alias for a liaison that went far beyond operational necessity. You and Sir Alfred, comrades, yes, but more than that. You shared a bond born in the trenches, a love forged in secrecy. But after the war, Sir Alfred chose a different path. Respectability, marriage, and you, mon pauvre docteur, you were cast aside like an old boot." The room was deathly silent, save for the faint crackling of the fire. Poirot took a step closer, his voice almost a whisper. "For years you swallowed the betrayal. You treated him, served him, all the while knowing that your love had been discarded in favour of wealth and reputation. But then Sir Alfred fell ill, and you saw your chance. Revenge at long last. Not loud, not violent, but poetic. A revenge written in the language only the two of you could understand." Greaves shook his head wildly. "No, that's insane." "Insane? Non, mon ami. You poisoned his drink. Oh, so gently. And then, after his death, you performed your final act of theatre. You removed his polished shoe, placed the old worn one in its place, and left your signature, Valentine, inside. It was your farewell, your last love letter, written not in ink, but in footsteps." Greaves covered his face with his hands, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "I never wanted to kill him. I only wanted him to remember." But remember he already did. That is why, when he realized his heart was failing, he reached for the shoe. Not to expose you, but to say goodbye. The silence that followed was the kind that only comes after the truth is laid bare. Poirot now stepped back, surveying the room with the air of a master craftsman inspecting his finished work. "And now, mes amis, let us walk together through the final steps of this tale. Let us see how a pair of shoes and a glass of brandy led us to murder." He turned to Hastings. "Mon ami, do you recall the bottle of cognac Sir Alfred kept in his study? A bottle only one man handled regularly. His physician, Dr. Greaves." Hastings' mouth fell open. "You mean he poisoned the brandy?" "Exactement. A clever poison, chosen not for speed, but for subtlety. A gentle weakening of the heart, disguised perfectly as natural decline. And so, on the night of Sir Alfred's death, the final dose was given. Not enough to kill instantly, but enough to ensure that when the strain of confronting Lionel Chase followed, the heart would fail. He spun neatly on his heel to face Lady Penwick. And then, Madame, you entered. You saw the shoe, the old shoe. You thought it held a letter meant to destroy you, so you tampered with it. But you were not the first to touch it. Poirot gestured to Greaves. The doctor was already there. You see, after administering the poison, he knew Sir Alfred would fall dead in his chair. And so, before the body was found, the shoe was exchanged, the note left inside. A message from the past, from Valentine. It was part confession, part accusation, and part twisted farewell. Why the shoes, Poirot? I asked helplessly. Why not leave a simple letter? Poirot smiled faintly. Because, mon ami, the shoe was their secret. In the trenches, Sir Alfred and Dr. Greaves used their shoes to smuggle messages past enemy lines. It was a private language, a language of trust and of betrayal. The shoe was their monument, and so it became their gravestone. Greaves slumped in his chair, defeated. I never meant to kill him, he whispered. I only wanted him to remember what we were. He remembered, Doctor. He remembered with his final breath. Poirot clasped his hands, his expression unusually solemn. Murder, mes amis, is like a well-made shoe. It must fit perfectly. It must walk the path of truth, even if that truth is ugly. But every crime leaves a loose thread, a scuff, a crease, a step out of place. And when Hercule Poirot sees that loose thread, he pulls, and the whole shoe unravels. Hastings shook his head in wonder. All this, over a pair of shoes. Poirot gave his most theatrical bow. Non, mon ami. Not the shoes, the story they told. And the story, as always, is everything. There is a particular silence that falls upon a room when a man knows his secrets are no longer his own. That silence settled over Dr. Greaves like a heavy cloak as Inspector Morton stepped forward to place a hand upon his shoulder. The doctor did not resist. If anything, there was a strange calm in his expression, as though a burden long carried had at last been set down. So, Greaves said softly, it's finished. Poirot inclined his head. Oui, Doctor. The story you began so many years ago, the story you tried to bury with a pair of shoes, it has taken its final step. Greaves gave a brittle smile. He made me believe I was his world once. Back in the trenches, we clung to each other, hope and love muddled together in the mud and the cold. We promised to build something after the war, but when the medals were polished and the uniforms folded away, he chose his reputation, and I became a memory he could not afford to keep. His hands trembled slightly as he spoke, but his voice was steady. I didn't want to kill him, you know. I only wanted him to remember who we were, to make him see that you can't just erase a man like that. And so you poisoned him. Not in anger, but in love twisted by bitterness. You left him the message only you and he would understand. Valentine Greaves gave a soft, humorless laugh. It was our private word, our little joke back then. He thought it meant a day for lovers, but it was something more. It meant we belonged to each other, no matter what. Inspector Morton led Greaves toward the door, but before leaving, the doctor turned back to Poirot. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot, not for catching me, but for remembering us. Poirot gave a small bow. It is not Hercule Poirot who remembers, Doctor. It is the truth, and the truth she always remembers. As the door closed, Hastings exhaled loudly. Well, of all the cases, Poirot, that one takes the biscuit. Poirot merely smiled. Wait, mon ami. There is still more to understand. We returned to the village inn later that evening, where Poirot, having removed his shoes and replaced them with a pair of soft embroidered slippers, settled into his armchair by the fire with a sigh of contentment. Now, mon ami, he said, steepling his fingers, let us walk through this crime, not as a series of actions, but as a story written upon the human heart. I sat opposite him, notebook in hand, feeling once again like a schoolboy, awaiting a particularly difficult lesson. I still don't understand, Poirot. If Greaves wanted revenge, why not simply confront Sir Alfred? Why the elaborate show with the shoes and the message? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, Hastings. Because this was not merely revenge, it was a game played not with weapons, but with psychology. You see, Greaves wanted to be caught. He wanted his story to be uncovered, not by the police, who would see only poison and opportunity, but by me, Hercule Poirot, who would understand the human heart behind the crime. I frowned. He wanted you to catch him. Mais oui. The message left in the shoe, Valentine, was not only for Sir Alfred, it was for me. A breadcrumb placed so deliberately that no true detective could resist following it. Greaves knew that of all men, Hercule Poirot would notice a scuffed shoe where none should be scuffed. I was stunned. So, the entire crime was staged as a confession. Poirot gave a small nod. It was theatre, mon ami. Greaves had spent years tending to Sir Alfred's failing heart, watching the man he once loved grow old and distant. But in death, Greaves saw a chance to reclaim the narrative, to make Sir Alfred remember, even if only for a moment, who Valentine truly was, and at the same time, to force the world to see their story at last. But why the shoes, Poirot? Why not a letter? A confession? Because a letter can be destroyed, mon ami. But a shoe is part of a man. It carries his weight. It remembers his steps. The shoe was not just a clue. It was the stage upon which Greaves played his final act. I shuddered slightly. It's almost poetic. Almost? Non, Hastings. It was entirely poetic. A tragedy in leather and polish, written across the floorboards of Penwick Manor. Poirot leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. The psychology, mon ami. It is always the key. Murder is rarely about the act itself. It is about what the act allows the killer to say. To themselves, to the world, to the one they could not forget. I stared into the fire, trying to reconcile the quiet, nervous Dr. Greaves with the man capable of weaving such a deadly tapestry. You know, Poirot, I said softly, for a man obsessed with shoes, you seem awfully fond of your slippers. Poirot chuckled. Slippers, mon ami, they are the reward for the man who solves the case. Shoes, they are for those still chasing the truth. And now, Hercule Poirot may rest his feet at last. We lingered by the fire after supper, the events of the past days still heavy on my mind. Poirot, as always, looked perfectly at ease, tucking into a plate of delicate lemon biscuits with the same relish he applied to solving murders. I could hold my tongue no longer. Poirot, I said, I must confess something. He raised a brow. Confess, mon ami. You have been secretly polishing your own shoes. This would be a first. No, not that. I simply cannot fathom how we ended up here, from a dead man's pair of shoes to a murder born of love, betrayal, and revenge. Poirot gave a small, indulgent smile. Ah, Hastings. You always wish the world to be tidy, cause and effect, lined up like soldiers in a row. But human nature, mon ami, she is untidy, especially in matters of the heart. But shoes, Poirot, shoes! How can something so trivial hold the key to murder? Poirot's eyes gleamed. You English, you mock the shoe, as if it is no more than leather and lace. But a shoe, Hastings, it is the diary of a man's life. It carries his weight, remembers his journeys, knows his hesitations and his boldest steps. And for Sir Alfred, his shoes guarded his secrets, letters, betrayals, his very heart. A man can lie with his words, mon ami, but his shoes, they do not lie. I leaned back, utterly bewildered. So all this time, the shoes weren't just evidence, they were the whole story. Exactement. The crime. It began with a shoe in the trenches, and it ended with a shoe in death. What could be more poetic? I shook my head in admiration, if not total comprehension. You truly are remarkable, Poirot. That, mon ami, is well established. But even Poirot cannot improve upon the perfection of a well-made shoe. The following morning, as Poirot and I prepared to depart the village inn, the innkeeper's daughter appeared at our table, clutching a neatly wrapped package. "This is for you, sir," she said shyly, placing the parcel before Poirot. Poirot's brows lifted in surprise. "For me? Quelle surprise! From whom?" The girl shrugged. "It was left at the door just after sunrise, with a note." Poirot unwrapped the parcel with great care, revealing a pair of exquisitely polished leather shoes. They gleamed like mirrors, their craftsmanship undeniable. Nestled within one shoe was a folded slip of paper. Poirot opened it, reading aloud. "A gift from one lover of fine shoes to another. May they always fit perfectly." Hastings' eyes bulged. "Who on earth?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Ah, mon ami, the giver does not matter. It is the message that speaks. A story ends and leaves a footprint behind." I stared at the shoes, now shimmering in the morning light, and knew that, in true Poirot fashion, even the end was simply the beginning of another mystery. Poirot settled his hat precisely upon his head, adjusting it by the merest fraction of an inch. "You see, Hastings, the human heart. It is always the untidiest part of the crime. Motive, love, revenge. They scuff the surface of the soul, just as surely as a stone scuffs the finest leather. Shoes, they tell the truth, because they are worn by the feet that cannot help but follow the heart. And that, mon ami, is why even the cleverest murderer forgets. Hercule Poirot always looks down." With that, he stepped into the sunshine, leaving me to follow, one step behind. As the case of Sir Alfred Penwick's death comes to a close, one truth stands above all. In the world of Hercule Poirot, no detail is ever too small, and no clue is ever too insignificant. A scuffed shoe, a forgotten lover's name, even a misplaced pair of gloves, each thread, however thin, weaves itself into the fabric of the truth. Poirot does not simply see what is there, he sees what should be there, and what human nature tries so desperately to hide. And as always, the past leaves its footprints, footprints that only Poirot knows how to follow. Beside him, Hastings shook his head in exasperation. "Only you, Poirot, could uncover a tragic love affair and a double murder, all from a pair of shoes." Poirot smiled, eyes twinkling. "Mon ami, the shoes, they only walk the path. It is the human heart that chooses where to step. What do you think was the most important clue in this mystery? The message in the shoe, the falsified alibi, or Lady Penwick's hidden past? Let us know your theory in the comments below. If you enjoyed this Hercule Poirot mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more brilliant detective stories to life. And trust us, there are plenty more Poirot puzzles to come. Stay tuned, mes amis. The next case may be even more mysterious than the last.